Not yet. As the impeachment inquiry intensifies on Capitol Hill, there are new calls for U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr to recuse himself from any Justice Department review of the Ukraine matter. Now, the New York City Bar Association says if Barr doesn't recuse himself, he should resign or be sanctioned because the AG's name keeps coming up in the investigation. According to a White House memo of that now infamous July 25th phone call, President Trump references Bill Barr 5 times, including in this exchange. President Trump tells Ukrainian President Zelensky that he wants him to look into Joe Biden and his son and says, quote, whatever you can do with the attorney general would be great. Now, on that same phone call, President Trump then says that he will have his personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, quote, I'm sorry, did I skip one there? All right. Give Zelensky a call, and I'm also going to have Attorney General Barr call, and we can get to the bottom of it. Just last week in this bombshell press conference, acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney suggested it was legitimate to ask Ukraine to participate in an ongoing investigation by the Justice Department. That's likely a reference to Barr's review of the legitimacy of the origins of the Russia investigation conducted by U.S. Attorney John Durham. And on Tuesday, the top U.S. diplomat in Ukraine, Bill Taylor, told lawmakers that he and EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland discussed, quote, the possibility that the Ukrainian prosecutor general, rather than President Zelensky, would make a statement about investigations, potentially in coordination with Attorney General Barr's probe into the investigation of interference into the 2016 elections. Joining me now from the Washington Post's Plum Line blog, Greg Sargent. He just wrote a piece called, quote, an overlooked Bill Taylor revelation hints at worse to come from Trump, and law professor at the University of Alabama and former U.S. Attorney Joyce Vance. Thanks to both of you. Good to see you both. Joyce, let's just start with this. The New York City Bar Association says the Department of Justice, quote, has a unique role in safeguarding the rule of law under the Constitution. By failing to recuse himself from DOJ's review of the Ukraine matter, Attorney General William P. Barr has undermined that role. We don't know if Barr actually did anything wrong. That's not what the allegation is, but it's clear that he is involved in the thing that the Department of Justice would be reviewing. What's your thought?
So much of the ethical issue in situations like this that prosecutors at the Justice Department struggle with involve the community or the country's perception of DOJ's integrity as much as an actual conflict. So I think you're right to point out there's no evidence one way or the other right now that helps us understand what Barr's ultimate role in this situation was. But because people will be left with questions if he continues to participate into any sort of criminal investigation in this area, whether it's of Rudy Giuliani or anyone else, it's imperative that he recuse. And Ali, I think it's important to note this sort of statement from a bar association is very unusual. I can't recall another bar association calling for an attorney general of the United States to recuse. It does come from the New York City bar, not from the state bar that would ultimately have some sort of responsibility for discussing Bill Barr's bar membership. If he, in fact, is a member of the New York bar, I don't know. But this is an unusual moment.
Greg, I want to just make a reference to the piece you wrote, the title of it, an overlooked Bill Taylor revelation hints at worse to come from Trump. What do you mean by that? What's the overlooked part of his revelation?
Well, in the testimony, that in the opening statements, Taylor said explicitly that Sondland told him during a conversation that they had a conversation about the possibility of potentially making a public statement, that the Ukrainians would make a public statement declaring the investigations that Trump wanted, which we all know are completely political and sham investigations, and in a kind of cryptic reference said something along the lines of this could be done in conjunction with Bill Barr's review of the origins of the Russia investigation into what happened in 2016. Now, we don't know much more than that, because we don't really know whether they would make a joint statement or whether the investigations would be fused in some sense. But the key point here is that 2 senior U.S. officials were talking about the Attorney General of the United States in some form or other lending his legitimacy or validating this sham investigation by Ukraine that Trump was pushing for. Now, Barr wants his review of the origins of the Russia probe to be seen as apolitical and legitimate. But again and again, we keep seeing him pop up in the middle of Trump's corrupt scheme to get Ukraine to validate his own conspiracy theories about what happened there. And you would think that the Justice Department would make a much more forceful and clear statement about the fact that, about this effort to use Barr and the Justice Department's review. But we don't hear that much from them, and that's because we don't really know whether there's what the overlap between the two is, and I think we really need to know more.
But I think that's a good point you make, Joyce. Whether or not the Justice Department or anybody has a position that Bill Barr doesn't need to recuse himself or isn't involved, or it's not Bill Barr's fault that the president talked about him on this phone call, whatever the case is, there is a question. And many times when people recuse themselves from something in a legal setting, it's not that there's wrongdoing, it's that there's a perception that something may not be fair.
That's exactly right. And what the Attorney General owes the country at a minimum is an explanation for why he continues to be involved. For instance, this entire extremely unusual investigation where DOJ is putting its resources again in trying to resuscitate this debunked myth that Ukraine rather than Russia played a role in the 2016 election. We know that Barr has been traveling around the world, putting an awful lot of attention for an attorney general into a matter like that. There's plenty of reason to believe that he should step away, that he should recuse. He, of course, led the department that failed to open a criminal investigation into the whistleblower's complaint, and we now see that there's plenty of potentially criminal content to that complaint, which likely warranted merited investigation by DOJ. So Barr, at a minimum, should give us an explanation of his conduct, but certainly should consider recusing.
Greg, two senators who served during President Clinton's impeachment trial wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post in which it says, if called upon, this is Tom Daschle and Trent Lott, by the way, if called upon to hold another presidential impeachment trial, we hope senators of both parties will again put aside partisan considerations and approach the task with the same spirit of fairness that served the institution of the Senate and the country so well decades ago. It's not unusual that people watching this might say that's not likely to happen.
Well, I think we're seeing today a very clear indication that that's extremely unlikely to happen. I believe just moments ago the news broke that Lindsey Graham is going to, introduce some sort of resolution condemning the House impeachment probe for its closed-door nature. I think our only hope here is that Mitch McConnell feels that the senators that are facing very tough re-election battles need to be associated with some sort of process that has at least the appearance of legitimacy. That may be our only way that we might get something of a reasonable process. But otherwise, I would think that we should be pretty pessimistic that they'd even do anything even remotely fair.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.